Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's Tech Forum session. I'm Madeline Griggs, software developer at BookNet. Welcome to writing, editing, and designing books with AI-enhanced tools and workflows, lessons learned in a rapid content creation context. Before we get started, BookNet Canada acknowledges that its operations are remote, and our colleagues contribute to their work from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Wyandot, the Mi'kmaq, the Ojibwe of Fort Williams First Nation, the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, the Métis, the original nations and peoples of the lands we now call Beaton, Brampton, Guelph, Halifax, Thunder Bay, Toronto, Vaughan, and Windsor. We encourage you to visit the native-land.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. Moreover, BookNet endorses the calls to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space-making in the book industry. The book industry has long been an industry of gatekeeping. Anyone who works at any stage of the book supply chain carries a responsibility to serve readers by publishing, promoting, and supplying works that represent the wide extent of human experiences and identities in all that complicated intersectionality. We at BookNet are committed to working with our partners in the industry as we move towards a framework that supports space-making, which ensures that marginalized creators and professionals all have the opportunity to contribute, work, and lead. For our webinar today, if you're having any difficulties with Zoom or have any tech-related questions, please put your questions in the chat, or you can email techforum@booknetcanada.ca. We're providing live ASL and closed captioning for this presentation. To see the captions, please find the Show Subtitle button in the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. If during the presentation you have questions for us, please use the Q&A panel found in the bottom menu. Lastly, we'd like to remind attendees of the Code of Conduct. Please do be kind, be inclusive, be respectful of others, including of their privacy, be aware of your words and actions, and please report any violations to techforum@booknetcanada.ca. Do not harass speakers, hosts, or attendees, or record these sessions. We have a zero tolerance policy. You can find the entire code of conduct at bnctechforum.ca/code-of-conduct. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Dione Mentis is the COO and Senior Architect at Coko Foundation, where she currently leads Ketty's platform design and project management. With extensive experience in digital publishing and educational content development, Dione has successfully managed large-scale projects for prestigious organizations like Oxford University Press, NIH, and HHMI. Her expertise spans digital-first, multi-format book production, publishing workflows, and innovative technologies that enhance publishing processes. Prior to Coko, Dione held roles at Electric Bookworks and in the South African educational publishing industry. She has a strong background in content development, editorial management, and digital product management. Dione's ability to coordinate complex initiatives and foster collaborative environments has been instrumental in driving the success of numerous projects in the publishing sphere. And our second guest is Barbara Rühling. She has been the CEO of Booksprints since 2016 and focuses on streamlining the service and workflow, developing new formats, and diversifying the company's client base. Previously the lead facilitator at BookNet at Book Sprints, she continues to facilitate sprints in English, German, and Spanish. As a facilitator, Barbara's background in cultural anthropology and documentary film makes her observant and attentive to each group's unique processes. And now I'm going to hand it over to our guests.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's an honor to join you in this online gathering this evening, or daytime for you. My name is Dione. I'm from South Africa. I've worked in many roles in the publishing industry, from proofreading to publisher manager. And a few years ago, I transitioned to the business of making books, from the business of making books to the business of making technologies and platforms that produce books. Sorry, one moment. I just want to find my screen sharing. There we go. Okay, jumping back to my screen. At Coko, we're in the business of building transformative publishing technologies. And today we'll be looking at Ketty, a book production platform with a specific focus on how it uses AI in its workflows. Before diving into the technology, though, it's important that we place these technologies within the context of our core values and vision. At Coko, we believe in an open publishing ecosystem, which means that all of the tech we build is open source, and it's designed from a perspective that values the collaboration and workflow needs of teams above all else. This has led to us building innovative solutions that advocate using modern publishing approaches, such as single source publishing, which is foundational to our technology. Because of this vision and focus, we have built an infrastructure that speaks to the publishing needs across all of the entire workflow. And all of this infrastructure is specifically open source so that we can create an ecosystem of open source tools. This infrastructure is modular and can be combined in different ways to create platforms for specific use cases. For example, book production, which is the main focus today. So we'll be looking at the Ketty platform specifically, which incorporates all of this infrastructure into one platform. And we'll be focusing on 3 key parts of that, which are using AI and have integrated AI into it. First, we'll be looking at Wax. Wax is a browser-based word processor. It's highly configurable, and it comes with different packages that add functionality for the various processing requirements that publishers need. It comes with the basics of all the formatting tools, and then extends it to things that publishers specifically need, like track changes, citations, and now it includes an AI assistant, which we'll look at. The second part of the infrastructure that we'll look at is what we've called the AI knowledge base. This leverages RAG technique, or retrieval augmented generation, and that's using the AI assistant and adding to its capabilities by incorporating internal documents, external documents, and allowing you to reference those documents in your responses. So it makes your responses far more specific to the kind of content that you're trying to create. Both of these parts of the infrastructure are obviously focused on content creation and editing, but publishing involves far more than just content creation. And the next part that we'll look at is content design and layout. We've developed a tool called that we're calling the AI Design Studio. And this part is particularly revolutionary because it empowers book creators with advanced design capabilities, but it allows them to interact with this design by simply giving it intuitive commands. This particular part of the infrastructure uses another aspect of our open source infrastructure, which is Page.js, and that is an automated typesetting engine. So you will see this functionality in action in the demo a bit later. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the Ketty platform, and I'm going to give a quick overview of these technologies in action. What I'd like to remind you of here, though, is that this is one tool, and it's showing you how AI can be used in various steps of the publishing workflow, from the creation of the content, the editing of that content, and also then the design and layout of the content. Nevertheless, you can apply these ideas in any other types of publishing steps and workflows. So try to keep your focus more on the workflow and how it might be used to enhance what you're already doing instead of the platform itself. Okay. I'm jumping over to the Ketty platform. Over here, I'm on the dashboard of the platform, and this is showing me all of the books that I'm working on. For this demonstration, I'm going to open a book, A Guide to Modern Book Production, and I'm assuming that I'm collaborating on this book with our founder, Adam Hyde, and we're writing on the topic of modern book production. I've gone ahead and created some chapters for this demonstration that fit into this topic. And I'm first going to demonstrate the example of the knowledge base. So as thought leaders on this topic at Coko, we've obviously got existing content that we want to refer to and base our writing on. So the knowledge base gives us the ability to upload content that we can then reference to this particular book. So on this page here, I've added some content that we have written at Coko, a particular long article that our founder wrote on single source publishing. And I've also added an editorial style sheet that is relevant to how I want this book to be edited. Now, what happens in the background when I upload these files is that this content gets broken down into smaller chunks and it gets indexed so that when I refer to the knowledge base in a query as I'm writing, it can search that index and find the relevant information that I'm looking for. Going back to my book, over here you can see I'm on a chapter called Fundamentals of Single Source Publishing. And I want to show you the difference between a query that is general, for example, going to a general ChatGPT query, and a query that is building on information that is in that knowledge base. I'm going to highlight some content and add the prompt, introduce this concept. Now I'm going to turn the query off, which is going to mean that this is a general query. It's not specifically looking for information in the knowledge base. And this will give me a response that's pretty comprehensive. It tells me what single source publishing is, its benefits, and some other information. I'm going to insert that content just as a comparative. And then I'm going to do the same query with the knowledge base on. So over here you can see that it's giving me a more specific definition. It's giving it as a strategic approach in the publishing industry. It's giving me more information about the stakeholders within publishing, authors, editors, designers, and more information on specific formats. I'm going to insert that information below. And what you would have also seen there is there was a citations tab. I'll show you that again by expanding this definition. So over here, I'm selecting some content that was already provided, and I'm going to expand it even further. So what you'll see here is it's given me more detail on the approach, a number of paragraphs, and it's telling me where that information comes from. That's the name of the file that is referenced in the knowledge base. I'm going to insert all of that content. Now, obviously, I've generated a bunch of content here. All of this information would need to be reviewed by myself and my collaborator on the book, and we would then need to decide how we take this chapter forward. But the main point that we want to show you here is that the information that you're able to produce from a knowledge base of content that you might have written yourself or content that you and your collaborators have produced is going to be far more specific to the needs of your writing than a general query. And that is the main benefit of a knowledge base. Another part of the assistant, which the knowledge base uses, is the ability to have custom prompts. So I'm going to go to my book settings over here. Now at Coko, we've taken the approach that AI use should always be in the control of the person who owns the content. In this particular context, I'm the owner of this book, and so I have the ability to decide how the collaborators on this book use AI. So as you can already see, the functionality of the knowledge base is turned on, and we've shown that basic functionality now. I'm also going to turn on a customized prompt, something you might, not relevant to this book, but something you might use frequently in another context is to translate something to Spanish. So if I want to add that prompt there, then that will be available to me at a click of a button, as opposed to having to type that out numerous times. So if I wanted to translate that to Spanish, I would look at that custom prompt section and select the translate to Spanish option. I'm not going to do that now for the purposes of this book. Okay, so that is an overview, a very brief overview of the knowledge base. Barbara will be going into more detail for the specific use cases for the Booksprints organization. Before I hand over to Barbara, though, I want to show you another feature where AI is integrated. For that, I'm going to go to a different book that has more content. Over here, I'm in a book. It's A Passage to India. It has a number of chapters. We've got a number of chapters here and one part, and I'm in the process of creating this book. I've added some images, and I've completed some of the content. Again, I'm going to go to the book settings. Over here, I haven't turned on the knowledge base or AI prompt use. It's not relevant for the use cases of this book, but I do want to be able to utilize AI in the design of this book. For this, we're going to turn on the feature of the AI book designer, which is a beta feature at the moment. And that gives the ability to open the book in the context of an AI design. You'll see I have this page over here where I can view the design and give it prompts. Okay, so in this page, you see three different main areas. We have the prompt area where I will write an instruction. We have the book content on our left. I can select the entire book or aspects of that book, for example, the title or this paragraph, and then prompt design prompts added that will then display in the PDF of this book. That is going to be the result of my design. So since this is a classic novel, I'm going to be I'm going to give it a general query, assuming that I am not a designer and I'm more a publisher. I know what I want, but I don't necessarily know how to create that design myself. So what we're going to see here is how to be able to utilize simple prompts in order to change the design of a book. So I'm going to say, make this book look like a classic novel. Now what's happening here is this prompt is utilizing both the AI, but it's giving the instruction to the typesetting engine, Page.js. So the real magic that's happening here is actually the Page.js design, which is automating the typesetting. So you can see if I close the content and view the book, it's been changed. It's been changed in a number of ways to create a design that looks like a classic novel. And a summary of those changes are shown here on my left. So the page size has been changed with reduced margins. The font has been changed to New Times Roman. We have a number of changes in terms of font height and line height. And you can see that the result is quite significantly different from the starting point, and it's pretty good for a classic design. I could then go and export that book, save it as a PDF, and use that PDF. Now, it seems like a simple prompt, but obviously something like that in a traditional print environment where you're utilizing InDesign to typeset a book would be hours, if not days of work. And I can go from one type of layout to another type of layout in seconds. So as I mentioned before, the beauty here is that you're using existing technology, but what you're doing is your AI is giving the control to the creator and making this available to someone who might not have the technical skills, and then they can use that by themselves. I'm going to go back to my book and hand over the presentation to Barbara, who should be joined with us. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks, Dione. Yeah, hi, my name is Barbara. I am CEO of a little company called Booksprints, where we help groups of experts to create nonfiction books in 5 days. So Booksprints was founded by Adam Haidt, who also founded Coko Foundation. So we've been working with Dione for the last year and a half or so on thinking about workflows, how to integrate AI into our 5-day process of collaborative book writing. And yeah, I think we've all by now understood that it doesn't happen that we ask AI to just create a book for us with the press of one button, but rather breaking it down into very little steps and tasks and see where can AI enhance the process and help us move along. So I'm going to explain quickly how our process works at BookSprints, and then I can show you how we tested using AI in these different steps of the process, both in terms of the technology that Dione presented, but also sort of in the facilitation of the human experts and their collaboration. So yeah, to give a very brief overview, we are a group of facilitators, book designers, illustrators, and copy editors that are focused on this 5-day short, intense book sprint. And we work together with any kind of groups of experts that come to us and say, okay, we need a book quickly, or we really love the aspect of collaboration because maybe it's a very interdisciplinary field, or maybe it's something that there's very practical knowledge around it, but there's also people who've been working on the theory, and it makes sense to bring these together, and we can help them get through that process really quickly. So let me just share my screen with you. Yeah, so from zero to book in 5 days. This is basically what I explained. You can see here people coming together with lots of post-it notes. There's a mix of digital and analog media that we like to apply. We work on walls and paper, but then we've also been working with Coko Foundation for 15 years, making use of technology. So 15 years ago, when there was no Google Docs or anything like that, Adam Haidt came up with different tools to help collaborative writing on the internet, and now little by little also seeing what we can integrate in terms of AI. So when we come together for those 5 days, our facilitators walk the experts through a process of narrowing down their scope, the idea, the scope, the concept of the book. So obviously they come to us with a specific idea, but there's often around 10 to 15 people involved. And maybe each one of them has a slightly different idea. So we help them really narrow it down. Who's your audience? What's outside of the scope? What's really the best use we can make of this group of people? What's the most innovative we can do? We then work a lot with sticky notes, visualizations, different methods to help the experts structure their ideas and come up with something that is an initial table of content, potentially, or at least some clusters of topics that they want to work on. And those clusters are then the starting point for smaller working groups or individuals to start drafting very, very first drafts of content. This even usually happens on the first day. So we really run them through a quick process, because then a lot of the conceptualization and structuring also happens through the writing. So then over the next 4 to 5 days, people are writing in small groups, in individuals, sometimes 2, 3 people together, drafting different parts of the content, and then handing it over to the next small group or the next individual for editing. And we do this on the basis of actually collective authorship. So it's not a collection of essays, so to speak. It's really a book that has, a list of 10 authors that all have been working on all the parts of the book. So editing means the next group takes over and makes it their own. Add to it, changing it, improving it, or bringing it back to discussion. No, often they start disagreeing, and then we have a lot of times where we have group discussions and we work through the disagreements and see how we can sort of get the book to something that everybody can subscribe to. These iterations happen 3, 4, 5 times. So by the end of the 5 days, everyone in the group has worked on many different parts of the book. Everything has been going through many different hands and eyes. And there's really, even though it's been written by all these different people, but there's still one red thread, one reader journey that everyone can follow and that the reader can follow through. In the background, under step 3 and 4 here, we highlight the production. So we have our team of copy editors, illustrators, and book designers who work remotely. And they will do a lot of what Dione just showed on the platform online in terms of polishing up any ideas for illustrations, of the book design, of very simple copy editing, cleaning up the text, often overnight. So while the group of experts finishes a day and goes to bed, our team is distributed around the globe so they can take over and clean up the text for the next day, send feedback backs, and create illustrations and work on the design. Now that AI became part of the picture, we looked at each step of that process and looked at like what can we do here? What are the different little mechanisms that we can make use of? Here's again just a slide showing you, our facilitators, copy editors, illustrators, and book designers that make up the team and sort of what we bring to the table. Whereas the experts are the ones who are actually writing and editing and doing the conceptualization, the structures. We just support them. So that means we can work with any kind of groups together. We've been working a lot with tech companies. We've been working a lot with academia, international organizations, governments, NGOs, because we don't have to bring in the expertise. We just support the groups of experts with these services. So now that we started exploring how to enhance our processes with the help of AI, our assumptions in the beginning were suddenly at every book sprint that we have something around maybe 10 to 20 book sprints a year. Everyone is going to be using AI tools. So we thought this is going to be wild. Like, how are we going to deal with this? We need to get ahead of the game and we need to figure out how we will handle the situation. What we found in reality is that the experts from many different fields that we've been working with have been very hesitant to include AI in their processes. So we actually found that there has been at first very little use at all. And then when we saw it slowly coming into the process, we saw that most experts have been using those tools very mindfully. So again, one of our assumptions has been that, oh, this is going to be very inefficient. People will start using, ChatGPT, for example, for the first time. Will be able to create long text, and then somebody has to go through and edit all of this and make it work. And we really need to be able to control this. But instead, we found most experts have been quite mindful about how to integrate it in small ways and keep it under control. And then our third assumption was that collaborative writing in the way that we do it needs very specific approaches. It's different from an individual author having that direct conversational style as we see in ChatGPT, for example. Instead, we need to find out how can we still create cohesion and consistency when there is already a group of diverse voices with different writing styles. So that is what we've been working on at Book Sprints for the last 15 years. How do we make this work with different people who bring in a diversity of perspectives, but also obviously sometimes conflicting opinions, different writing styles? And how can we do this now that AI is involved? Then we also thought about what is our approach to using AI. I mean, there's organizations who reject the use of AI, and I understand, of course, the reasons for it. And there's others that wholeheartedly embrace it. And we thought, well, for us, it's important that the use is ethical and transparent. So that's very hard to define because the legal at the moment the legality is still being discussed a lot. It's very complex. It's also regionally different. So to the best of knowledge and according to sort of fair use, how can we use it in a way that seems to be ethical? And transparency in the sense that how can we disclose how AI enhanced tools have been used. We looked at a lot of different examples. How do other publishers deal with it? And some have a very minimum standard of disclosure. So, for example, Amazon now for Kindle, they say anything that has been supported with AI tools, there is no disclosure necessary. If it's really been created from the bottom up, then there needs to be a disclosure. Whereas others are very strict and say every single prompt that you've been using should be cited, should be referenced. So we looked at sort of different ways of how can we find a text that the experts can agree to use and add to their books and make transparent how they use the tools. Another approach for us is productivity. Obviously, for us to make books in 5 days, productivity and efficiency is something that's been on the top of our agenda. And we didn't want this to become a playground of, like I said earlier, people just creating loads of text and then it becomes really out of hand. Everybody has to then weed through what's even useful. For us, it was important that we make it productive and efficient from the very beginning by focusing on use cases that are small and really controllable. Like, what are small tasks that we can enhance with AI without letting it go out of hand? And to us, that also meant that what's really interesting for us is not to replace any of the experts or the subject matter experts or the experts from our team, but rather how can we free up the human writers from some tedious tasks? Like, what are little things that, are very repetitive that we all know that, like, oh, I wish I could automate this somehow and make it more productive in that sense. Accuracy, of course, is a topic that always comes up. We all know by now that large language models hallucinate, so we have to always make sure that what comes out at the end is still accurate, and trust in the same manner. So in an earlier talk in this webinar series, I heard George Walkley talk about humans always in the loop, and I think this has also been our approach. So there has to be always an interplay between the humans in the process, and then a step where an AI tools come in, and then the next step, the humans have to check this again, etc. It also meant that we wanted to focus on using existing materials that the experts of each group and their organizations already bring in. So Dione presented the knowledge base, so we can fill that knowledge base with existing written materials, blog posts, previous books, anything that has been, and base the knowledge creation on that rather than on everything that's out there. And we also decided to focus on low risk use cases. So something that makes it easier to control and to fact check rather than creating sort of like long list of new content that then are hard to verify. So the use cases that we focused on at first to experiment with were creating those knowledge bases that Dione showed, and then creating content based on the knowledge base. We worked with some experts for prompt engineering to create some prompts that our experts can use that are very detailed, and those prompts include then the scope of the book, the intended reader, notes on the style guide. So each prompt should already create content that is, first of all, based on the pre-existing materials in the knowledge base, and then also already following the style guide, etc. Then the other use case that we looked at was applying style guides across the book. So, things like tone, language, grammar, spelling, seeing how well that would work to make the text consistent, especially across, again, like I said, the 10 to 15 experts in the group. And here to make it more controllable, rather than asking the AI tools to go ahead and edit the written texts, we focused rather on sort of receiving feedback and proposing changes. So then the humans in the loop again can see like, oh, okay, this is something that has been proposed to me. Do I want to implement this or not? Other use cases that we have been experimenting with is creating lists of glossary terms based on the written material by the experts, creating lists of acronyms, proposing headings. So we've tried this out now with groups of experts, and um, please take this with a grain of salt because we've only had a limited yeah, groups that we've tested this with. So obviously this is all still very much in development, and one group differs from the other, and whereas one group might be very reluctant to use AI tools, the next one might be huge champions of it. So yeah, we've had some experimentation and learned some lessons, but it's still very much a work in progress. Towards our three steps in the approach that I discussed earlier: productivity, accuracy, and trust, and the ethical and transparent use. These are some of the lessons that we learned. I mentioned that we had engineered very large prompts, including the intended readership, etc. Our experts felt like these were very much less intuitive than that kind of conversational style that they've been used to now by talking with ChatGPT, with a sort of like a back and forth. So, and there it's very short, often, yeah, conversational prompts, as in like, how can I make this paragraph sound better? Whereas our prompts were, many paragraphs in itself explaining the context, etc. So that worked much less with the groups we've worked with than just sort of their short form prompts. Creating content also wasn't as useful for many of the experts as editing what they had written by themselves. So starting from zero and then asking the AI tool to create content on a topic, say, write a chapter on this and this and this. Many of the writers who were writers of the books because they are experts on the topic, they felt much better writing the content themselves and then using AI tools to help edit and improve the language, rather than starting from scratch. Both because they were often strong writers and big experts who said like, oh, I can write this better myself. I know this. I don't want to fact check every little thing because we know the hallucinations are happening. So I prefer to just write it down and then ask for editing help. They did find, however, that the AI tools were really good starting points for these kind of tedious tasks, such as the glossary terms, list of acronyms, etc. But also here, really starting points. So there was still a lot of human intervention necessary, so to speak. In terms of accuracy and trust, yeah, we found there was still quite some reluctance to use AI for content creation, like I mentioned, especially because each context is different, each book is different, and a lot of the experts prefer to write for that specific content rather than then sort of fact checking everything that was AI generated. We also tested out a lot of AI detectors that are out there that universities nowadays are using a lot to check student papers, and they are very unreliable across the board. So it's still interesting to use them and to see what the detectors will point out. But texts that are very well edited, like published texts, for example, will often also be flagged by the AI detectors as potentially written by AI. So they are really only a tool to see what the internet might recognize as AI created, but not anything that we can rely on in any way at the moment. Of course, everything is developing, so we will see what will happen here. For our other point, the ethical and transparent use, we saw that this kind of disclaimer text that I discussed earlier, that you have to be prepared to have many different versions of those because, first of all, people will be using the AI tools in very different ways. Um, and second of all, we found that there's also a big reluctance by experts to make the use of AI tools transparent. So while on the one hand, we think that it's something that's necessary and also will be will be required by publishers. There's also sort of like a fine line to see because many of the experts said, okay, everyone is doing it already anyway. Like, why should I say, yeah, I use ChatGPT to help me edit these paragraphs when I feel like strongly I'm still the author and this is my text. This is not something that has been created from bottom up. Grammarly is used by AI, and nobody would say like, oh yeah, I use Grammarly, for example. So also here, sort of like a reluctance and a fine line between how much do we actually use AI and how much do we also make it transparent that we did use it. I'm going to stop it here and because we still want to have some time for Q&A. I can talk a lot more about this, but I'm also curious to hear what questions will come up. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate hearing from both of you. We have a few questions from the chat, obviously. I'm going to start for Dione. We have a few questions. First one is, you emphasize that your organization is open source and not for profit, but can the tools that you make be used to create books that are not open source or in a company that is for profit?
Yes, absolutely. So the technology itself is open source, but the content that's produced there can be licensed anyway, however the author likes.
Perfect. Somewhat related to that, people are wondering for EPUB production in Ketty, is accessibility, what kind of pathways are available for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I didn't include any of that in the demonstration because it was outside of the topic of this conversation, but you can produce EPUBs, print PDFs, and publish directly to a website through Ketty. That EPUB is generated from that same single source content, which is marked up obviously as HTML as the source in an accessible way. So that is good to go from the system.
Interesting. And would there be any way to tailor the accessibility to anything specific that the user is trying to achieve?
So for the time being, we have accessibility requirements, for example, adding alt text to images. Obviously, the content itself is tagged in a way that it's expected in the EPUB requirements. A heading is a heading, a paragraph is a paragraph, etc.
Yep.
If there's anything beyond those standard rules, I would imagine it would need to be extended further, but certainly possible.
Perfect. And then one last question for you, and we're going to move on to Barbara's questions. I'm just going to group them up here. People were wondering about the Ketty systems and its application of style guides across a book. How would you be setting up a style guide for the AI tools to apply them accurately, and what kind of thing does it look like?
So I think there would be various ways to achieve that. What I've tried out in terms of style guides is to create a style guide as you normally would as an editor, and to upload that into the knowledge base. In terms of the best way to structure that style guide, it's helpful to break up the styles under meaningful headings, because the knowledge base is chunking that content into sections and then is going to look for those index sections when you ask it a question. But there's still a lot of experimentation and testing that needs to happen around that. From my testing, you get quite good responses, but of course the knowledge base isn't implementing those responses. You still need a human to implement those changes. So one way I would like to do that in Ketty going forward, is to have those style changes implemented but shown in track changes. And then the author can go through and decide what to keep and what not to keep. That would be great, but doesn't exist in Ketty at this moment.
Right. That kind of ties into Barbara's idea of making sure that the people have a chance to edit, but not necessarily just wholesale replacing their text. Speaking of,
Yes.
for Barbara, we have a few questions as well. One of the questions, just generally, are your clients publishers, or are they individuals who are self-publishing, or some combination of there?
It's a whole range of different clients. Um, Rarely are publishers our direct clients. Often do we work with groups who then work with a publisher of their choice. So, for example, if a group of academics comes to us, they often already have a established relationship with, I don't know, MIT Press. We just had a book recently. That's why it's on the top of my mind. So we don't keep any ownership of the book. We hand it completely over to the authors, and they then deal with their publisher. Sometimes we also work with publishers directly, and often it's also a form of self-publishing when, for example, a tech company produces a manual for a new product, then they will distribute this with the product, or if an NGO produces something like a report, they have their own channels of distribution. So it's a form of self-publishing, yeah. But we're agnostic.
Right. And then I guess related to that, people were sort of wondering, since you're integrating the use of AI, but you've obviously been around since before AI has been sort of widely popularized, what kind of changes have you made in like your business contracts or in discussions you're having with potential clients? Or just like other surprising areas that you found in your business changed with the use of AI?
That's a really interesting question. I say we have been very careful integrating AI in the work with our clients. We've sort of carefully chosen some groups where we think, okay, especially say like an open source tech company where we think like, okay, these people have already done their own experimentation and they're probably open to working with us on this.
Right.
Whereas we have a group of lawyers who work for government where we think, okay, these are probably very careful and very reluctant. So let's take a step
They
back
might not
here.
jump at it. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's been always a conversation before the sprint with the organizers, seeing, okay, is this something that you could be interested in, and what would be the extent that you would feel comfortable with, and then this is something that we are interested in testing out, and how can we sort of come together. We also had clients approach us saying, oh, can't we now just, do we even need 5 days? Can't we do like 5 seconds, Um, So we haven't done those yet. 5 seconds. We haven't
Oh
figured out
my.
how to make those happen.
Oh, oof.
Um,
It's
and
five
then
days now.
in our own yeah, business operations, I think I mean we're playing around with it. I think like everyone, we haven't really found like the magic wand, to be honest. Like our social media people have been playing around with it, but we've we kind of are going back a lot to using it less and less at the moment. But I think this will come and go in waves, no, as the technology also evolves.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Speaking of the technology, for your foundation, do you exclusively use ChatGPT, or are you using other large language models or other forms of AI as well?
Mhm. So we've been using Ketty, the
Yep.
technology that Dione demoed, and that is based on ChatGPT.
hmm
Um, we have been looking at some other models as well, and obviously, when a group of experts come to us, what they do on their computers, it will depend also on what they have experience with and their own workflows. Um, I think ChatGPT is the most like widely available. We work very globally, so a lot of the other systems are restricted also by country.
hmm
Although I think it's opening up more and more. I think Claude just became available in Canada and in Europe as well. Um, So I think there's definitely other LLMs that are interesting, but for now we've mostly worked with ChatGPT and Ketty built on that.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, and from our perspective, it was the fastest development route to go with ChatGPT or OpenAI's API. So we have started with that, but we are already exploring providing alternatives. So, for example, in the AI designer, we're already trying out versions where we are using Mixtral instead of OpenAI. And of course, there's different models, both that are open and closed, that are better for different tasks. And so
Yes.
that in itself provides a lot of opportunity where you can say, perhaps for the designer, you might want to use X model, and for another part of the publishing workflow, you might use Y. And there's many ways that it can be extended, but certainly to get to an innovative solution fastest, we chose one model that was well documented, and that was our starting point.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think you actually sort of answered one of the other questions that we had here, which was what were you exploring in terms of the uses of AI, getting more into the specifics, trying out different models. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think more specifically, some things that are kind of next on our mind are using AI for speeding up the requirements around accessibility. So, for example, generating alt text for images, which can be a really labor-intensive thing to do, automating that, and then providing a way to sense check it, obviously to have that human sense check step as being part of the workflow. And then also remixing or repurposing content for other use cases, particularly in the space of open education resources. There are ways that AI can really help around that. So that's just two areas for us that are next up.
Interesting. This reminds me, one of my high school professors ended up writing a math textbook, and so many of these issues seem to be coming up in her time. Issues of style when you're working with groups of people together and keeping consistency. Big problem. We had one question about the sort of concepts of fair use. For Barbara, you mentioned that ethical and transparent use of AI is important and is in line with the concept of fair use. Do you have any have you had any issues around like copyright or licensing or uploading of things that are copyrighted into, say, knowledge bases for Dione? And how would that look in terms of copyright and licensing? Like if people are putting in copyrighted knowledge information, not something that they're making themselves.
I can answer from our perspective. Yeah. So obviously, from our perspective, we are providing tools, and it's up to the user how those tools are used. As in any other technology, you can add copyrighted content, and there needs to be someone who checks that. So that's where we draw the line. It would be nice to have tools that check authorship, but as Barbara mentioned, that she's tested a bunch of those, and they don't seem to be very reliable, at least not yet. But if they get to a point where they are, then that sounds useful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to close off. Oh, sorry, I have to close off for today. Do you want to do a quick last comment?
Okay, I can just say in book sprints, usually the entire content is original content that's created in those 5 days. But of course, there's always the potential for cheating. No, I mean, you have to, you have to do your general
just
check.
as there is in traditional publishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us today. Before we go, we'd love it if you could provide feedback for this session. We'll drop a link to the survey in the chat. Please take a couple of minutes to fill it out. We'll also be emailing you a link to a recording of this session as soon as it's available. To our attendees, we invite you to join our upcoming session, Updates to THEMA and their applications to the Canadian market. which is scheduled for November the 14th. Find information about all upcoming events and recordings of previous sessions on our website, bnctechforum.ca. Lastly, we'd like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support through the Canada Book Fund, and thank you all for attending. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.